Denham, I'll get to your role in founding Canada's first black-owned radio station in a bit, but I wanted to go back to where you were born and raised in Hanover Parish in Jamaica. If you had to describe your childhood in one word, what would it be?
Idyllic.
Idyllic. Why is that?
Because it was in the country. We were unaware of all the sophistication, no electricity. And there was a lot of land to run around on. My back door was on the ocean. There were horses to ride around and birds to shoot with slingshots, and you would cook them right there out in the bush.
Yeah.
So it was pretty good, and lots of games to play with neighbors.
Your father was a self-made man?
Yes, I'd say so. In fact, he advised me not to work for anybody.
Why was that important?
Well, he wanted to be independent. He had a mind of his own, and he thought independence was a great thing. He used to say that when Friday comes, his hand goes like that, with pointing down. It doesn't go like that, reaching up for a paycheck. He's making the paycheck.
Right, right. And that's something you kept with you throughout your life?
I tried to.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't all the time, of course, but as soon as I could, I did.
Your mom was Hanover's first female justice of the peace. Life wasn't bad for your family. And in the beginning of the book, the thing I love is that they tried to instill into you the idea of noblesse oblige. What did that term mean to your parents?
Well, it meant that they should help where they could.
Yeah.
And if you're fortunate, you help out other people. When saying that doesn't mean you're wealthy or anything, but 2 loaves of bread is better than none. So if you had 2, you would share at least a quarter of it.
Yeah, you look into your neighbor's bowl only to make sure they have enough.
Absolutely.
What did that look like for you and your family? How did your family practice noblesse oblige?
It was natural. There was I remember there was a lady living down the lane from us, and my mother would always send an older lady would always sell meals down to her. For some of the kids in the village. That there was one particular guy that lived next door. He was always there at supper time, singing a little song, so he's there.
Yeah.
And my mother would have him in, sit with us, and eat. And she was well connected, so she knew who were the strugglers around. And there was one whole family that she took in one by one and sent them to school and got them a trade and so forth.
That's the way it was, That's the way it was. I can think of my family the same thing. People who had some weren't rich by any means,
right?
But you did everything you could to help out.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when my mother died, I didn't know some of these things because I left when I was 19. I was told that there were 25 kids that passed through her house, that she helped out.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
You left when you were 19. You had a pretty comfortable life in Jamaica. At least you paint that picture in the book. Why did you leave to start a new life in Canada?
Well, it wasn't by North American standards, but if you don't know what you're missing, you don't miss it.
Yeah.
So we made do with what we had, and it was quite different here when I got here. Different culture, different people around you, different relations. It was quite different.
What inspired you to leave in the first place? What made you want to go?
Well, as you know, it's a colonial country, and your chances are limited. And my horizons were broader than what I saw there. I certainly didn't want to be working 16 hours a day in a sugarcane factory. In my case, I was working at a weigh scale, weighing which is in my book, In the Black. I didn't want to be working at a weigh scale weighing farmers' canes for the rest of my life, because it was like 16 hours a day, 7 days a week during reaping time. When there was no reaping, it was a different story. You had a pretty good time. But then the pay wasn't that much, It was £3 6 and 8 pence. You could hardly afford a bicycle.
What I find so inspiring about reading your book is when you came to Canada, I'm always so interested in people who do a lot of different things. I think people think there's one way to success, but really there's so many forks in the road that lead to someone to be as successful as you. You worked as a science teacher, you ran a nursing home, you got into the print business. But when did owning a radio station become important to you?
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, when the idea about owning a radio station, when I put it to some people in the community, they asked that same question, but in a negative way.
Why would you ever want to?
What business do you have going over there? And I would say, well, we have, as black people in Canada, we have a right to be in all facets. Doctors, lawyers, storekeepers, radio station owners, taxi drivers, the whole realm. But I had a newspaper, a weekly newspaper called Contrast. And, of course, it's a weekly paper, so if something happens, say today, Thursday, you won't hear about it until next week, Thursday. And radio was, aside from the fact that it was a step up, it was more instant. As a CBC program used to say, as it happens. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing. Another thing was the cultural aspect of it. There were so many budding artists in the city that never get a chance to display their wares. They were all in the basements and garages and doing their number and could not even hear the music. They had to tune into Buffalo. And in fact, if you wanted to have an R&B concert at a nightclub, you had to go to Buffalo to advertise it. So all of those reasons, we thought we'd repatriate some of the advertising and at the same time get some of those budding artists out of their garages and basements and put them on the mainstream.
As someone who didn't grow up in Toronto, as someone who's not from here, it was so surprising for me to hear that people were going to Buffalo to attend concerts because those were the concerts they heard advertised in the radio stations.
Absolutely. But concerts that were held right here in Toronto had to be advertised from WBLK in Buffalo, pitched back to the Toronto audience. So it was a very puzzling situation. In fact, there were radio stations here that were forbidden to play urban music. And it was really not played until we got on the air in 2001.
It took 12 years. It took 3 bids to the CRTC to get approval
Absolutely.
For the Flow 93.5 station. The first bid was from 92.5 frequency. You lost to a country station. The second bid was actually for the frequency we're broadcasting from right now in Toronto.
Correct.
Yeah, I know, 99.1.
Correct.
That's a little awkward. You eventually won on the third try with the 93.5 FM frequency. What in your mind was the biggest hurdle you faced in those 12 years?
Well, overcoming the doubts at the CRTC that we were capable to the task, and of course, in some cases, raising the money to prove to the CRTC that we were able to operate and own the station. But we used a little trickery and everything else to overcome those. In fact, tell you a little story.
Yeah.
The very last application, we were short $3 million. So you make an application, you send it in, anything that they have questions about, it comes back in a deficit 3 months from then. So the night before we were to submit the application, we were short $3 million. We knew this banker at a mercantile bank called Joe de Tuba. Mm-hmm. So Joe signs a sheet of paper, said, don't worry about it, they got the money. Mm-hmm. We put that in. So of course the deficit comes back. Who the hell is Joe? But by then we had the money.
Yeah. You made it happen. I mean, we're talking about Toronto, which is the most diverse city in the country. What was their justification in not awarding you the license in those first 2 times?
Only heaven knows. In fact, it was unprecedented from the first application where the chairman of the commission, Keith Spicer, it was the first time the chairman had dissented from his panel and said, he wrote a dissenting opinion, a very, very scathing dissenting opinion saying Toronto should have had an urban station not just today, but 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And he very much told them that they were wrong. But by then it was too late.
Speaking to people in Toronto when I moved here who listened to Flow, and even speaking to people now when they knew I was going to speak to you, they were as excited about the contemporary hip hop and soul and old school house and funk that was on the network. But there were these specialty shows on the weekend. There was reggae and soca and house music, and then Toronto's indie rap and the R&B scenes. Why was it important, which is not something that a lot of commercial stations do, why was it important to have these specialty shows pop up?
Well, we wanted to be inclusive. We wanted to include everybody. We weren't one-tracked mind.
Yeah.
We thought we would include everyone. Mm-hmm. And so we did, because the city listened, everyone in the city listened. There were more people that weren't black that were listening to the station than black people, which was very pleasing to me. And we also wanted to, part of our mandate was to encourage Canadian talent. And in fact, we had committed $3 million to promote Canadian talent development, which we did, and we think quite successfully. Hence, we had all these different genres of programs going on.
What's remarkable is the artists who got their start, and one of the first times they got played on the radio was on Flow in Toronto, and now are huge successes all around the world. I mean, I'm especially talking about Drake. Drake's first big hit stateside, "The Best I Ever Had," is one of the songs you brought in. And Absolutely. You were one of the first commercial radio stations to get behind him early in his career. My apologies.
The first.
The first commercial radio station. Yeah, I'll take it. The first.
The first.
Did you know then that what he'd become?
Well, I was mostly concerned with the business end of things, with the corporate end of things. But I made sure that there were people there, like Farley Flex and Wayne Williams and people like Ty Harper here, who works for you, that knew the music and knew the city and knew what was going on. And like I said, that we tried to develop, they knew what we wanted. They knew what our intention was. Because we always said we had two imperatives. We had a corporate economic imperative,
yep.
and we had a social imperative. And we know that all these kids were beaming, ready to go.
Are those hard to balance? I mean, in my job, I always hear there's a delicate balance between art and commerce. Is there a delicate balance between your economic interest and your social interests?
Only if the green monster doesn't get in there, greed.
Oh, right.
I guess the green monster is jealous, isn't he? But only if greed does not get in there. But if you want to believe in social justice and equity for all, then it's not a problem. And in fact, 7, 8, 9 years later, I was very gratified to see the big corporations on Bay Street and Wall Street starting to pay people to teach them how to do that. Because it comes naturally if you think equitably. It's not a big thing.
Denham, what were some of the challenges Flow faced as a black-owned radio station operating in an exclusively white-owned and controlled commercial radio market?
Well, my book outlines a lot of the challenges we faced. There were advertising houses that kept saying the station's too black.
And this wasn't 1943. This is in the 2000.
It was in this century.
Right,
It was in this century. We had a lot of challenges too. Part of our bread and butter was the live to ears at nightclubs, and we did very well at it. And people have told me that the police were very hostile to the crowds that attended the urban dance clubs. In fact, owners have come to me and told me they were challenged by the police not to have Flow there because it encouraged too much of a certain type of person. And that was one challenge. Another big challenge we had, too, was not long after we started, we had some epidemics. Some fever that came over from China. What was that?
The SARS?
Yeah, SARS.
Yeah.
SARS. And that was devastating. And then we had the big collapse of 2008. Mm-hmm. But in spite of all that, we managed to withstand all of this, and we did quite well.
And in 2011, after 10 years as the principal owner of Flow 93.5, you sold your holdings for a reported $27 million. To
Oh, is that what they
now,
say?
That's what they say anyway. That's what
rumor.
That's rumor has it, we'll say.
Okay.
After everything you've been through to get that station on the air, why did you decide to sell it?
Well, as it is now, you know, I'm told that with all the Yahoos and the different commercial communications companies in the United States, they're probably down to about 3 or 4 of them now. Mm-hmm. There were probably 17 at one time, and they've all amalgamated, and so here it was the age of amalgamation. For example, Standard Broadcasting with 39 stations sold to Chum. Astro with almost the same amount of stations sold also. And there was this great amalgamation. So now you had not only economies of scale, you had more than that. We, with one standalone station, could not compete with amalgam like BCE, which we used to call Bell. Mm-hmm. You know, in the old days, they used to call it Mother Bell, and it was considered the widows and orphans pension fund. You know, you can't compete with those conglomerates.
But also, by the time 2011 rolled around, I mean, especially now these days, it's easy to see how we can take for granted that when they turn on the radio, they turn on TV, there's going to be some kind of black music represented, regardless of who owns the station, regardless of who the station is catering to. How do you interpret that change in sentiment in Canada over the past 16 years?
I think Flow had a lot to do with it. And in fact, not only were we the very first radio station to play Drake, but we think that he probably set an example to the Weekends of the world. And now when you look at the charts, Toronto artists are 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4, mm-hmm. 5. And I, Flow sometimes in sober moments take some credit for that, for introducing it to Toronto, to Canada. Because, as I said, it was forbidden at one time for urban music, as they euphemistically call it, to be played on Canadian airwaves. And when we started, like I said, everybody we saw how successful it was. Everybody was lining up to listen to it, so everybody started to play it. And I think then it kind of legitimized it and helped with the progress of that genre.
There's still so much progress left to be done. Well, what do you feel can be done to make Black and Brown Canadians feel better represented in this industry and by this industry?
I think the people at the top have to give equal attention. I mean, there was a big, not that Beyonce needs it, but there was a big kerfuffle at the last Emmys, where
the Grammy Awards.
Yeah,
where Adele won Album of the Year. Yeah,
and a lot of people thought that was on pure talent and merit. So a lot of that still goes on, but I think more and more of the urban music is coming to forth. But it needs acknowledgement, and it needs equality. It needs fair judgment in all aspects of it.
Even though Flow 93.5 is gone now, the impact of your work, as you mentioned, is still being felt. And I love that you said, in a quiet moment.
Yeah.
Every now and then.
Reflect.
You'll reflect on what you did to put Black music into a community that wasn't hearing it on their commercial airwaves.
And by community, I mean everybody here,
Yeah.
Black, white, Spanish, First Nations, everyone.
A lot of the people who've worked for you have gone on to successful broadcasting careers. You mentioned him earlier, the producer of this segment right out there right now. I'm looking at him, though he's trying not to look at me. Cue producer Ty Callender. He was a host as Ty Harper on Flow 93.5. I mean, how does it feel to see these people you nurtured, these people who you hired, go on to work and go on to succeed and go on to prosper?
It's very gratifying. It's very gratifying. In fact, I count that as part of my payoff. Because, as you know, when we first started, we had a lot of support from the Black community. And they thought that meant reggae music all the time. But you cannot sustain a station on reggae music. And I tried to explain to them that never mind the not playing of reggae music all the time. When we came into the business, as I explained in my book In the Black, there was probably one sales manager in radio in all of Canada. There were no producers, no one in any other aspect of the business.
Of color. No
Yeah.
producers, no sales managers, no ad execs of color. No.
Absolutely.
No.
Absolutely. You could count that there was another sales person who was an ex-football player with the Calgary Stampeders out in Calgary. That was it. Now we had people in front of the mic, behind the mic, from Vancouver to Halifax, doing morning shows, doing every aspect of the business. Sales. I see some of these people driving Mercedes around town right now here in Toronto and all over.
I hope you take more of those quiet moments and reflect on how you help make that happen.
And I wish them well. And I'm very proud of them that they have. And not only that, but we even went to the so-called ghettos and had internship programs with some of the students from Jane Finch and had them come to see how a corporation runs, how a radio station runs. And we gave scholarships to Ryerson, to people of color, to study radio and television over there. And in fact, we were very proud about that. And there's still scholarships in our name over there at Ryerson right now. So I was happy for other things than music that Flo did for the community and awakened a whole generation of people as to what they're capable of and what they can achieve.
It certainly did. Denham Jolly, it's been an honor speaking with you today.
And you, sir. Thank you very much.